You're listening to How to Stan, the podcast about both specific fandoms and fandom culture and Hollywood as a whole. To learn more about this show as well as the other podcast I do, 17 Karat K-Pop, and to find a link to a playlist of every How to Stan episode, which will all be in your feed if you're subscribed to 17 Karat K-Pop, visit 17, that's 17, carat, C-A-R-A-T, kpop.weebly.com. All of my content is free right now, but please, to make that stay the case, consider supporting this show, and supporting a young independent creator's podcasting dreams would really mean a lot to me. You can donate as little as $1 a month or up to $10 depending on what you want to contribute and how much benefit you see in my work. So if you like what you hear and want to show your support for it, visit anchor.fm/Hope-Jacobson with an O, not an E, /support. Or you can go to 17karatkpop.weebly.com and on the front page, click on the Support the Show button. Thank you in advance and enjoy the show. The events at Hillsborough Stadium in England, April 15th, 1989, permanently changed how fans are perceived in the world of European football and the ultimate course of the sport's history. For a long time, there had been feuds and the rise of this thing called hooliganism, referring to this extreme animosity towards opposing football teams. And at this game between Liverpool and Nottingham Forest, that animosity had been expected and prepared for. The staff that night at the stadium made sure to mark separate entrances, so that Liverpool fans could go through one entrance and Nottingham Forest fans could go through a different one. That way they wouldn't cross paths and end up brawling at some point. The problem was they were behind schedule because of bottlenecks in the process of moving people through these separate gates. So one of the guards on duty that night was either unfamiliar with or just didn't care about this protocol made to make sure these fans would not cross paths to avoid that heated rivalry. So this guard, unknowingly or just without caring, opened up another gate and said, just everyone go in. I don't care who you support, what team you're on, get in there. Which provided a literal entryway as well as a metaphorical one for these guards to argue later on that what happened that night was the fans' fault. Then the opposite problem started happening. Instead of fans taking too long to get into the stadium, they were all trying to get in too fast. It was such an extreme crush of people that over 760 people were injured, and 96 people died. The security then blamed this tragedy not on disorganization or miscommunication on their end, but on the fans they described as drunk and rowdy. But an investigation revealed that they had not been telling the truth. The investigation found that actually fans had been helping each other. Fans had tried to save each other, provide medical assistance where they could. The issue was a lack of organization and a lack of true preparation for different scenarios that the guards were dealing with. The guards had been unprepared and fumbled the response. So their response was wrong. The fans had been trying to help each other out as much as they could, but by the time this investigative report was publicized, this image of fans as having this everyone for himself mentality, as being a problem, as being roughhousers, that image of fans was now sealed in the public's minds by now. The damage had been done to their reputation. After an independent investigation, a new coroner's report replaced the old one, so now the cause of death is no longer labeled an accident. And in 2016, a jury declared that the victims had been killed. But due to a variety of technical reasons, none of the actual guards were prosecuted on manslaughter charges. One of the most interesting findings to me from the report was the finding that alcohol played little to no role in the response, or in the fans' behavior. So this was not just some drunken, disorderly crowd. This was just fans wanting to see the show. Which raises a lot of questions about the nature of sports fans. How much do we assume? How much is accurate about the stereotypes of sports-going people? And ultimately, what is the spirit of the game about? Where did that sense of community come from with fans trying to help each other get through that stampede, pretty much? And why all the passion in the first place? Remember, none of this would have happened if it weren't for trying and failing to coordinate separate entryways for different rival team fans, worried they would really get into it if they crossed paths. And why was it expected to get so hostile if fans from opposing teams crossed each other? Why are people so invested in this game, essentially, is the question. Today's episode of How to Stan looks at a brief history of European football, aka soccer. Why the unique appeal is there, how it maintains an odd mix of a local yet international, globally known reputation, and how the latest news of the Super League fits into the sport's history. Around the turn of the century is when a lot of it changed, and it stayed local. It stayed local in terms of the clubs, aka the franchises as we would call them in the USA. Those sports clubs were very local and homegrown and appreciated underdog working class roots, but the nature of the game started to get a bit more glossy and global. Eventually, there started being, of course, televised games internationally. Plus, they realized how soccer stars could become moneymakers and how they could turn stars on the team into celebrities and bring in sponsorships, and tons of more money could flow into the world of soccer. Especially because sports don't really have a regulated financial system. They just don't. It's a marketplace that isn't really... It's not like Wall Street regulations apply here, so... And really changing the financial landscape of football permanently was Roman Abramovich in 2003. He bought Chelsea, the team, which basically triggered the equivalent of the beginning of a super PAC era in the world of sports, where you can have these wealthy people buy up tons of teams, and actually half a dozen ended up being American-owned throughout that decade that followed Abramovich's purchase. But regardless of how many ownership changes there are in the teams, and what their actual financial worth is determined to be, fans haven't really seemed to care. They're very loyal and passionate towards their team regardless of those types of changes to status. Which is probably why all these super wealthy team owners thought they could get away with their plans for a Super League, because they just assumed fans will jump on board no matter what we do. That is not exactly what happened. Here are a few characters in this story you should know about before I dive into what happened this week with the Super League. There are a lot of names in this story that might get a bit confusing, but the main characters I think you ought to remember are Abramovich, who really triggered the, like I said, Super PAC era of sports essentially here. You have Alexander Ceferin, who is the president of a European soccer governing body, and the godfather to one of Andrea Agnelli's kids. And Agnelli is the president of an Italian team. Basically, the club owners have that familial connection, which just is an extra interesting layer here. So there's Agnelli, Ceferin, Abramovich, Florentino Perez, who is the Real Madrid team president and really the ultimate person championing the concept of the Super League, more than anyone else. Lastly, there's Joel Glazer, who is the co-chairman of Manchester United, and he's very supportive of the Super League, saying, quote, "By bringing together the world's greatest clubs and players to play each other throughout the season, the Super League will open a new chapter for European football," unquote. Basically what he argued is that this idea of theirs to take the big teams and turn them all into one big Super League would essentially allow for trickle-down economics in the sports world. He was trying to reassure people you don't need to worry about the more local, grassroots, underdog groups being financially crushed by this decision. Even if big-name players move into the Super League, they won't take the riches with them. He was basically arguing that this change in the game's structure would not be a blow to the underdog local clubs the way fans feared it would. The teams involved in the Super League were dubbed the Dirty Dozen, and they included 3 teams from Spain, 6 from England, and 3 from Italy. Some had very last-minute notice that this was happening, because players had not been consulted first. They found out after it was pretty much official by that point, and there was no point in arguing, hey, you're on the Super League now. They got these veiled threats in a memo, basically saying if you try to not take this opportunity, if you back out, it's now or never, you may be blacklisted. If you try to stop this plan, too bad. Not only are you going to be shunned, but we already filed paperwork in several countries to make sure that any attempt you make to stop this project from moving forward is blocked. So you will be blocked from blocking us. In January of this year, FIFA issued an official warning saying any attempt to create some sort of breakaway league will cause you to be banned from playing in the World Cup. We will not acknowledge officially your Super League if you try to do that kind of thing. So that was a warning back in January that, needless to say, went unheeded. April 15th, 2021, Tebas and Laporta met up. They are co-owners for a Spain soccer club. Laporta revealed to Tebas that Barcelona planned to join the Super League. But like I said before, this idea had been floated around here and there before, so they didn't really take it seriously at that initial meeting. Like, okay, I guess we're going to talk about doing that again someday. But when Laporta started elaborating on this plan and even naming some of the teams he claimed had already signed up for this, Tebas started thinking, oh my gosh. Jefferin also got worried, realizing this time could be different. So he started making lots of private phone calls and behind-the-scenes lobbying attempts to stop this plan from happening. He was actually so nervous that this might happen that he took the 8-hour drive to his office in Switzerland to find out what was going on and get to the bottom of it. Mid-drive, Jefferin got a call from Agnelli insisting, don't worry about it, calm down. Everything's fine, this is not actually happening. Back and forth on the phone during the drive, they tried to draft a statement to officially issue to clamp down on the fears and rumors about this Super League. When Jefferin arrived in Switzerland, he revealed what was happening to some European Club Association board members. He discussed how this meeting went by saying, quote, they were outraged. Even mafia organizations have some sort of code, unquote. The teams that were unafraid to just express public opposition to the Super League, such as teams from Germany and France, prepared to publicize their counter-argument. Meanwhile, there were lots of private meetings / lobbying sessions. Everyone was trying to recruit messengers and public figures and find prominent allies to publicly voice support for them and be in their corner. It was what everyone was talking about in the world of sports as well as politics, and all these famous faces started to get involved. Then the Super League sent a letter to FIFA and the UEFA, which is basically Europe's governing body, confirming the formation of the league and saying, we filed motions across Europe already, banning attempts to stop this from happening. The opposition had planned to do more public PR against this idea, but before they could, news leaked, and suddenly it wasn't just everyone through the grapevine privately talking about this. Now the fans knew about it, and the whole public did. The public backlash was super swift and intense. Fans felt blindsided and betrayed, calling it simply greed and audacity, that these billionaires thought they could just monopolize and upend the league in this way. A variable fans were particularly outraged about was the way in which the Super League would trade a focus on the potential of lesser-known players for a focus on flashy, long-established soccer stars. In order to compete in the Champions League, every team has to re-earn their spot every year. It's sort of like when you try out for a middle or high school sport, you're not guaranteed to still be back on the team next year. You gotta try out again to show that you still have earned your place. But the Super League would totally change that, and essentially guarantee Super League players spots in the Champions League year after year, no matter how poorly they played. It turned the league into a popularity contest, and altered the dynamics of the game in a way that demolished the original spirit of it, a point that was further brought home by the fact that players were offered a $400 million stipend, just to join the league. They were really trying to, and assumed that everyone would want these incentives to come and join the league. That would be enough to convince people to do this for them. And it, of course, was not. Fans started protesting in the streets. Leeds players wore t-shirts with messages that expressed their opposition to this. The former Manchester United captain, Gary Neville, went viral for his long rant against this. Radio and TV were just full of critics publicizing their opposition to this. Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister, even got involved and started condemning the move, as well as Emmanuel Macron from France. During a Chelsea home game, the roads had to be closed due to this massive fan protest. So then Jefferin placed a call to Gianni Infantino, the FIFA president, and Oliver Dowden, who is the sports and culture lawmaker in Britain. He called Gianni and Oliver to rally support to his corner. And then Oliver promised, "I will do whatever I can in my power to stop this from happening." Meanwhile, Agnelli, who had actually been reassuring Jefferine earlier that this would not happen, was now really advocating for it publicly, saying, quote, "Our 12 founder clubs represent billions of fans across the globe and 99 European trophies. We have come together at this critical moment, putting the game we love on a sustainable footing for the long-term future, substantially increasing solidarity, and giving a regular flow of headline fixtures that will feed their passion for the game, while providing them with engaging role models," unquote. Basically, in other words, saying, no, this isn't monopolizing. It's increasing solidarity within the sport. And this is not trying to make extra bucks with famous faces. This is ensuring a regular show of headline fixtures that will feed the passion of viewers. But yet another flip-flop happened because Agnelli was like, "Don't worry, this won't happen." Then was like, "I guess it'll happen. I'm all for it." Then, minutes after the late-night announcement of the Super League was made official, Agnelli resigned from his board post as well as head of European clubs. So now Agnelli was like, "Keep me out of this." Jefferine spoke out in the press very angry at Woodward as well as Agnelli, claiming he'd been blindsided. He called them snakes and liars publicly who had backstabbed him. Then 6 rebel teams, as they were called in the moment, were having a meeting to discuss what to do next. At the same time, there was a very hostile meeting taking place in Italy. Since sports had been feeling the financial strain induced by the pandemic, money was already a tense topic of discussion among them, so everyone was already naturally on edge before the shouting match even began. Meanwhile, players started being publicly opposed to what was happening, saying they had not been consulted at all. Agnelli was really publicly smeared and called a traitor, and just when everyone seemed to be mad at each other, suddenly Perez, the Real Madrid president, who was very into this plan, decided that he would smooth things over by going on late-night TV and having a very, very public, flashy delivery. He was going to really sell this plan. After all the uproar, he was still going to convince people. It seemed like too little too late, but that didn't stop him. He very, very publicly embraced this concept of the league, and he gave his big pitch. He called it a plan to actually save football. And he said, quote, "We will help football at every level and take it to its rightful place in the world. Football is the only global sport in the world with more than 4 billion fans, and our responsibility as big clubs is to respond to their desires," unquote. A bit ironic to call this responding to desires, but whatever. But Jefferine responded indirectly by turning to the cameras at a press event and saying, quote, "Gentlemen, you made a huge mistake. Some will say it is greed, others disdain, arrogance, flippancy, or complete ignorance of England's football culture. It doesn't matter. What does matter is that there is still time to change your mind. Everyone makes mistakes," unquote. This statement may have been a big factor in what happened next, because after that statement broke, sponsors and TV networks started joining the chorus of opposition and pulling out of the deal. Then someone leaked the news that Chelsea had privately been debating how they could exit the league. And once that was public, Manchester City exited. Then 2 more teams exited just minutes apart. Then a 4th team left, Manchester United, who basically said in their statement, "We're out and Woodward is out. He's leaving his post at the end of 2021. Then Liverpool exited, then Milan exited. By that point, the Super League issued a statement saying, "This will not work." So all of this chaos, aside from the January warning, had started on a Sunday. And by that Tuesday, 48 hours later, the Super League went from, "Oh my gosh, this is actually happening this time," to "That's never going to happen." There are some big takeaways here that speak to greater truths and concepts when it comes to fandom culture. First of all, the relationships that are easiest to topple are the ones built on money or greed. What makes these dynamics of European sports clubs so interesting, because those relationships are the most fragile because they're just based on money. These billionaires aren't buying the teams because they truly just love and are so invested in the players on that team. It's about money. And it's also about proximity, because even if you're a smaller club, if you are affiliated with elite players or more elite clubs, that proximity to fame can also help drive fame and drive revenue opportunities. There's also this constant push and pull because at the end of the day, sports teams want to be receptive to what fans want, maybe not for moral reasons, but monetary reasons. Going away from and completely severing ties with the local culture and the local feel of these teams, while at the same time trying to bring you some flashiness and famous faces. So trying to stay local and national appeal-wise is the tightrope that these teams walk. The second big takeaway I have is that fans care deeply about maintenance of the true spirit of the game they are into. The maintenance of the true spirit of it. Regardless of player changes, regardless of ownership changes over time, their ultimate protectiveness over the whatever they are a fan of is based on its roots, its authenticity, and its core that should be unchanging. And if that core changes, that's when fans get upset and might leave the fandom, or at least show hostile, very public displays of their outrage. The stuff around the core can come and go, but if you change the core of the game by upending the whole pyramid structure to suddenly not be as much of a merit-based system, that's when fans got upset. Third lesson. There's a sense of invincibility that billionaires have that is so fascinating to me, where they just assume that everyone will go along with what they want and think the money's worth it. And it shows how much some billionaires' identities are really tied up in their wealth. Fourth lesson here. Fan pressure works. Fan backlash works. Regardless of who is helping facilitate a fan's message, the fans who created that message for them to carry out play a critical role here. There's even an interesting political layer here. Would Emmanuel Macron and Boris Johnson have publicly spoken out against this league if they hadn't felt like it would score them some PR points with supporters? Would you have celebrities like James Corden on TV publicly condemning the Super League if they hadn't been a fan themselves, if they hadn't been invested in hearing the fans and trying to give those fans a voice? Ultimately, fans drive the messaging and then they drive the decisions. And remember, they're supporters, fans, whatever term you use, for politicians, for talk show hosts, radio jockeys, etc. They're not groupies for billionaires. There are not fans of, well, we can talk about a few specific examples another time, but I digress. The point being that fans are attracted to messages and messengers who are going to help be a channel for their passions and desires to be heard and met, for their expectations to be met. Fans will turn on the people who do not show that understanding of what they are upset about, do not seem to be in touch with a grassroots feel of the spirit of the game, who feel very detached from the fandom life, and in no way will help you carry on your message. And so billionaires kind of living in their own bubble led to the demise of this idea, because it's the opposite of being in a bubble to try to just dip your toe into the benefits of the world of the most popular sport on the planet. Although fan passion can get way out of line, fan passion can also be so incredible and impressive for positive reasons. It can make sure that the underdogs are looked out for. It can allow for the preservation of the original spirit of something. It can prevent something from getting too commercialized and therefore totally distinct from what its original state was. And that's ultimately what's so interesting about the security guards who blamed fans after the Hillsborough tragedy. Could fans get into a tussle and contribute to injuries at an event? Of course. Did they in the past? Of course, that's why they tried to separate the teams from the get-go. But that extreme fan passion can also drive their connection to each other. Sometimes, in the case of life-saving medical care, help each other out. Fan passion can be channeled for good things as well, on a global scale, with a global impact. So the bottom line that I get from the whole Super League is that ignore the needs and wants of fans at your own peril. Fans drive these decisions ultimately. They will affect who speaks out about an issue. They will affect the messenger and the messaging, and so ignore them at your own peril. the default ought not to be these fans are making things more ugly in the world of whatever you're talking about. In this fandom culture, they were trying to preserve the love of the game and the sense of community it brings, the sense of identity they have in it, and you don't want to touch that core essence, or you're doing it at your own peril. There's a really interesting book called Savage Enthusiasm, A History of Football Fans by Paul Brown. And like I always do on the show, I will link to it on my weekly newsletter. But some interesting key points from it are how football fans have historically been a bit aggressive and, to say the least, been making no secret of their anger when they lose, or even showing violence towards the opposing team. But a repeated point in the book that I find interesting is the rivalry between teams it's cited as being less personal and more of just a vehicle for expressing emotions and passion. Not to excuse their violence towards each other, but it's an interesting new angle to look at human behavior. Fandom identities can serve as a smokescreen in a way. Team identity and aggression showed when a game doesn't go their way isn't so much about the opposing team as it is a sense of pride and protectiveness over their own team, which they deem superior. So it's interesting to reframe fandoms as not having irrational anger necessarily, but channeling their anger sometimes in inappropriate ways in the name of devotion to a cause. It's a fascinating way to look at human behavior and why people are fans of what they are fans of. Why to some fandom isn't a club or a hobby, it's a lifestyle. That's what my show is all about. Why do we like what we like? And I hope I helped better understand why this Super League caused so much pain to fans of European football and people around the world because of what it represents. At the end of the day, we have that lesson that fans can overcome and drive the messaging in positive ways and hold on to the original spirit of what they are a fan of. If they team up and do so effectively, they can do it effectively, is the bottom line. Thank you for listening to How to Stan as always, and I will talk to you all again very soon.